live. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So we are hopefully now live on my Facebook page, Paula Tailory, my YouTube channel, and hopefully my profile over on LinkedIn. So good morning to anybody who's joining us on any of those wonderful channels. So this morning, I'm here to talk to Dave Bradburn from Opus Creative Design. Dave is a graphic designer who I have worked with for a number of years. So this is my kind of Friday chinwag about something businessy and the typical kind of questions that you might have about that particular area. So please do feel free to chip in with your questions, your comments as you go. We're very open to your kind of thoughts, questions, challenges, ideas. It's all good. So Dave, I guess the obvious thing to do is start off by introducing yourself. I'm just going to look slightly distracted over here because I'm just going to draw us up on LinkedIn so I can make sure I keep track of any LinkedIn comments while you tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got into graphic design and branding.
Yeah, good morning and thanks for having me on, of course. But yeah, my background, it's a very linear path actually I've had to here. I went to university, studied graphic design, actually typography to be specific, and then worked for a number of design agencies around the northwest of England. I think it was cumulatively about 9 years that I did that for, and then I set my business up doing graphic design about 16 years ago, really. So yeah, a very linear path really along those things. It's that, but worked primarily, I've worked with a few very large businesses at times, but the majority of my experience is really working with small, medium-sized businesses and organisations, schools, things like that, really.
What was it that particularly attracted you into graphic design, or particularly typography, because that's quite an unusual one?
Yeah, well, it was just really each time I went through and did, options for GCSEs, for A levels, then went to foundation college after A levels, which is when you sort of go through the various different art disciplines and try out different ones and then decide on which you're focusing on. But I just went with what I enjoyed, to be honest, at each of those times of taking options.
Not a bad plan, is it?
Well, there might be better strategies at times, but then I do firmly believe that if you're going to be doing a career, do something that you enjoy, because you spend a lot of time doing it, don't you?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
So yeah, purely about what I enjoyed, really, and it narrowed down from there, really.
Excellent. Okay, so let's dive straight in, and we've kind of positioned this chinwag to be about branding, which I guess is the headline element to graphic design, and we positioned it as, does branding really matter to small businesses? So I guess we've got to start with the super obvious question of, what is branding?
Yeah, well, it is worth clarifying because it does get very confused at times. Branding as a whole, well, it certainly isn't a logo. A logo is part of the branding, but it isn't that. They're not interchangeable terms. Your brand as a whole is really the perception that people hold of you. If it's personal branding of yourself, if it's company branding of the business. So it's the perception that they hold. So they form that from every point of contact that they have with the business person, whatever. Focusing on the business side of it, for sake of argument, they will form that opinion from any experience they have of dealing with that company, whether it's buying online, whether it's in a retail, on the high street, whether it's speaking on the phone or to a member of staff, what they hear about the business from other people, what they read about it.
Yeah.
Every single bit that you can get about that, really. So the perception is, the brand is the perception in their mind when they've got nothing in front of them about that business. Now that means that brand exists. It'll be different for every person, really, that what they perceive about a business. We could name some big name businesses, and we may think very different things about them.
Yes, this is true. Well, you look at people like Apple, and you've got people who are Apple fanatics, and then people who detest Apple with a passion. So
yeah,
there's not too many people that sit in the middle there.
No, that's a divisive one. But if that's what the brand is. Branding is really the process of steering those perceptions. So you know, as we take up Apple, the visuals that they put out, the way that they get their messaging out, the way that the things are spoken about, the keynote presentations that they do, the actual devices that they put out as well, all those things contribute to how people perceive it, really. And they're doing things in the way that they speak, in the way that they put graphics out, in the way that they communicate, to steer people's perception in the way that they wish them to be perceived.
So it's interesting there, isn't it, that actually Apple's aversion, shall we say, to discounts and deals and things like that is actually a key part of their branding.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't deem that to be anything to do with their branding.
No. I mean, when in the graphic design sense, though, we come down to really it's brand identity, those sorts of things that we come down to. So it's a subset of the whole branding process, really. So on that does include the logo, but it includes the colours that they use, the colour palette they'll have, the type of fonts, typography that they do, the imagery that they use, the style of, you know, the style of imagery and things like that. And all of those things sit within the brand identity, really. You'll often have some big guidelines book for big companies that has all how these things should be presented, so that they're consistent, so that they all look like they've come from the sort of same family, really.
Yes. So talk to me a bit more about brand identity then, and I guess what are the key things that somebody needs to think about when they are contemplating or evolving their brand identity?
Yeah, it is how you wish that business to be perceived. So if you've positioned as I don't know, you're quite high-end, exclusive or something like that, you will go a certain way. If you want them to be take sort of the supermarkets or something like that, Waitrose or M&S. I'll sort of go at the high end of things. You know, they'll try and be quite exclusive, even sometimes be quite happy to be perceived as expensive in some respects, but it's high quality. The Aldis and Lidls go the other way. They're still saying quality and things, but affordable quality. And it's what you'll find is those, say, Waitrose and things like that will have sort of darker, more subtle, more sort of exclusive way of doing the colours and things that they use are as I say, more darker tones and things like that. It's more subtle identity, really, I suppose, rather than the very bright colours that the cheaper end of the market tend to use.
Yeah.
And that's where there's a whole load of colour theory, which we could spend another hour or something talking about that if we go into there.
But actually, I think that's a really interesting area. And I think in some ways, the smaller the business, it perhaps becomes, I don't know whether it becomes less relevant or more relevant, but I guess you must get a lot of customers coming to you, and perhaps when they're new in business or they're ready to evolve, they'll come to you and say, well, we really like this palette of colours, so we want to have something in this colour. So would you at that point be talking to them more about what does that colour suggest or imply, or guiding them to what perception they're creating through that?
There is some element of that. If you are with different colours, it's really, well, with any other brand identity, you're trying to influence other people's opinion. You're trying to get their perception. So actually, often it's more important about what your target clients will want, will be drawn to, and that kind of thing, than it is about whether you happen to like green or not. And you do get this, you know,
green's also
it's really not uncommon.
Actually.
Yeah, it is actually, but it is a funny one. Often you get sort of, oh, my wife doesn't like green. Is she your target client? You know, what's that got to do it? That said, I do think also there is a part of it that especially with a smaller business, you've got to believe in the stuff that you've got. You've got to want to hand it out. You've got to be confident in it. So it's no good having something that completely goes against all of that, really. And I think sometimes that whole confidence, that belief, especially at the beginning of a business, is far more important than it becomes. You know, with a big corporate organisation, it doesn't really matter whether the CEO likes everything about it. They're not the ones getting that message out there and things. When it's a one-man band starting out, very small company, whatever it may be, you've got to have a little bit of that belief and confidence from it. So there's a balance between the two there.
Yeah, I get that. Absolutely get that. when it's a, shall we call it a micro business? I don't really like the term micro business. I feel like it sort of brushes people under the carpet almost. But when it is a particularly smallish business, do you think it's important that the imagery of a business reflects the personality of a business owner?
Oh yeah, it's got to, and it's tricky to do that at first. You know, especially when we first start out. Often we're all compelled to do this thing where we pretend that we're bigger and everything, and you get sort of, well, it's like marketing literature and websites that refer to we when we all know there's only one person working there and things. You know, and actually that does no favors, because even if people believe it, they'll be drawn to this company that is larger and then suddenly discover that it isn't,
down the line,
and be disappointed at that point, or it just often reads as false, really. So
I think for me,
while we're on the theme of words that we don't like, I can't stand the authentic thing that gets banged around. But there is that kind of there's definitely a part of being honest and things, being portraying the picture that it is. You sell the good side of that, of the reality, don't you? Inevitably, but be honest with people about it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because it wasn't a piece of work that you did, but I remember talking to, in fact, she was a web designer who I knew quite well through networking a few years ago, and we'll come on to this, but she committed the cardinal sin of putting her potential new graphics onto Facebook for feedback. But I actually gave her feedback, and she was getting lots of people going, I like number 1, I like number 2, I like this, this, and this. And I actually just went back to her and said, I actually feel like it's really straight-laced and it's very, very sensible, and that's not you.
Yeah.
And she came back a few days later and said, I thought about that, and that's actually the best feedback that I had. That she was literally just looking at which colours do we like, and do we like this thing here and this thing here. And I think you can get almost obsessed, can't you, with the visual, but losing touch with what it's all about and why.
That whole thing where people seek feedback on Facebook and things like that, I always cringe at it. I have to say, one, when you see someone put, oh, here's a load of logo designs that my designer's done for me, I absolutely cringe for the sake of the designer. Actually,
or designer,
there's usually a few people who just want to rip it apart to promote their own.
Yeah, that's very true.
Services or whatever.
Yeah, well, you really needed to have this and this in there.
You'll have a mix in those cases, because there'll be some people on there who just say, "Oh, everything's great anyway," because they want to be supportive, which is very nice of them, but it's not particularly helpful. There'll be some people who just want to criticize everything or whatever, but more importantly, those people haven't seen the brief, and often they won't be the target market. So what is their perception of it doesn't really matter, really.
No, you're getting feedback. I always advise irrelevant audience, aren't you?
Yeah, so what I tend to advise people to do if they're seeking feedback on designs is, and it's quite reasonable they may wish to do that, get some extra opinions, but have 2 or 3 people that you really trust, that know your business. Go to them, ask their opinions and get their feedback back, because they'll probably be, you know each other well enough to be honest about it, really.
And they're not going to look at it just in terms of, well, I like pink or I like green. They're actually thinking about, this is who you are, this is your target audience, this is what my reaction is to that, and what I think your audience's reaction would be to it.
Yeah.
So you're getting.
And if you do have concerns as well, share them with your designer, because they'll speak through the pros and cons of it as well, and why they've gone a certain route.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
What are the classic sort of branding mistakes that you see people make, Dave, whether that's small businesses or some of the great big businesses? Some of the great big ones often make fabulous howlers, don't they?
Yeah, there's some very well-known ones, although there was one a few years ago, wasn't there, where Gap supposedly changed their logo to something that was pretty awful.
Yeah.
Although there was suspicion around that whole process was actually just a publicity stunt, really. But I think some of it is, well, the main branding mistake that people make is not designing and not understanding who their target market is, first off. And designing either for themselves or allowing the designer to design for their own ego, or it happens, or being influenced by, as we said, people who aren't really in the target market, and they're doing that. Other ones that you get sometimes are, it happens occasionally, and it's come up where you get one that actually maybe their kids have designed some aspect of the logo, and that emotionally is very close to them because it's important to them, but
Yes.
the clients don't care one bit about it, really.
No,
You know,
sadly not.
so you know, you can get this slightly amateurish thing that they're clinging on to. Maybe it's what they had when they started out, and that might have been
Yeah.
reasonable at that point, but it's probably time to evolve away from it. But they can't because of that emotional link, really.
Yeah, it is interesting because I've certainly had at least one client that I can think of, and I'm sure there's been a few more over the years, where they've got a logo and some imagery that was created when they first started the business. And I think because it's the first thing they've ever had that was theirs, you know, they've left corporate, they've started this business. It's like, that's mine and that's me. And even though it actually looks, you know, it was done by a designer, but you know, I think a sort of entry level designer. It was quite clear that it really needed evolving, and she was targeting corporates, so you know they were the type of people that were going to look for something a bit more professional, but trying to kind of encourage her to evolve that was quite a challenge, and it's a tricky one, isn't it, when people. So actually, in a sense, what you're saying is that part of a branding mistake essentially could be becoming too closely emotionally attached to your visuals.
Sometimes, it certainly can be. And it's a tricky one, but I mean, doing that things when you start out very much as a real startup business, it's sometimes the sensible thing to do something on a fairly bootstrapped, you know, low budget thing.
Yeah.
But move on as well. Go and test the concept, because sometimes where you think that business is going to be isn't where it ends up a year, 18 months down the line, is it?
Absolutely.
So sometimes doing that on the sort of very tight budget can be, you know, get something out there, get going, get earning, get working out whether the business works or not. Absolutely. But then once you've pinned it down, then invest in the you know, in the brand and the branding and whatever else.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, Dave, because I very rarely work with startups as a business coach, and the reason for that is because everything in their business tends to be evolving. Because for the typically the first 12 to 18 months, you're going into business with this idea of this is what I'm going to offer, this is who I'm going to work with, and this is what they're going to pay. And then you stick it out to the marketplace, and very often what you get back is something completely different to what you expected. And very often those first 18 months will be testing different things. You know, some things will work brilliantly, some things will absolutely fall on their backside. And it takes that initial trial and error to get to a point where you kind of go, right, I've got clarity. Now I can really build on that. So I think it's a really fair point to say you don't need to chuck a load of money at branding and a really expensive website and having all your ducks in a row when you first get started. Actually, what you need to do is just get out and earn some money. Get yourself to a consistent break-even point, prove your concept, then build from that.
Yeah, exactly. I tend not to work with a great deal of startups for exactly the same reasons, really. There are different types of startups, aren't there? Sometimes it's a new business starting from people who are very experienced in that sector. That's a little different. But from the ones really genuinely starting up for the first time, then often just get going somewhere, and we'll speak in a year's time.
Just get cracking. We've got a few people watching us in different places this morning. There's definitely a few people on LinkedIn, and Richard has said good morning. So if anybody's out there watching and you've got any questions or any comments, please feel free to chuck them in. Dave loves an impromptu, tricky question, so please feel free to chuck those in. Those are always.
It's Friday. I've got no.
Oh, to be fair, just say hello and good morning, because it's always nice to actually know who's watching. We get these little digits that go, you've got 3 people there, you've got 6 people there, and you're like, who are they? Okay, so moving on from that question, then I think there's probably quite a natural one in terms of when is the right time to use a designer, and is it sometimes okay to do some stuff yourself or have a friend help you or things like that?
Well, I think, you know, sometimes it's a necessity out of budget, isn't it, that you do that? But really, if not, no, you're best to have some framework put in place for the design. And then sometimes it's funny because a lot of designers take real issue over things like Canva and, you know, real criticise it. I think there's a place for it in the market, but I think actually where it works well is if you've got a framework in place, you've got you know, the brand identity, you've maybe got brand guidelines in place which have given you colour palette, and maybe you've got a template for the things that you use on Canva. But then you use Canva and things like that for the immediacy of getting things produced and getting things done, and also to produce every social media graphic that many people would use through a designer would cost you an absolute fortune.
Yeah, you'd
So having a template that you can work with,
it would cost an absolute arm and a leg. So
having a template that you can work with means that you can have that immediacy of getting things out, but you're still producing things within that whole sort of framework that has been professionally designed, really.
So what kind of things? Because actually, I think sometimes when people are thinking about working with a graphic designer, there's a few questions around what if I don't like what they produce. There's probably, certainly in the early cases, I think there's a bit of a lack of understanding about what should I expect of a designer? What kind of stuff are they going to ask me? How are they going to kind of help me make this much more relevant for my target audience than I would do myself? So what kind of help should somebody expect from a graphic designer?
Well, firstly, they should expect really a lot of questions early on in the process, because if that designer is going to do a good job for you, they need to understand you and your business and what you're trying to achieve, and that what your goals are for it, really. Because actually, it's easy to get a load of stuff designed, but to have stuff that's designed and is actually effective and productive is a different matter sometimes.
That's the point, isn't it?
So yeah, it's an important one, but it is very easy. Sometimes you get a request for, we want a leaflet or something like that. Why do you want that leaflet? How's it going to be distributed? How's it going to get out to the people? Who's it aimed to get it out to? And what do you want them to do after they've read it? It's kind of all those sorts of questions, and as well as a whole load of things of what are the challenges, barriers going to be to those people as they read it that you need to answer as well. So, whole load of things in that. But yeah, as well as that process, I mean, speak to the designer first, ask them what the process is as well. They should be able to explain it. So if you've got any concerns, they should be prepared to answer. In terms of the question about will I like what's designed, there is a bit of trust in this one, because you have to sort of find someone that see what they've designed before for other people maybe, and you'll get an idea of their capability from there. You'll also get an idea of their capability from those questions that they're asking at the beginning. Are they taking the time to understand you? Are they listening to what you're saying and things like that? But equally, there is a little bit of trust there, because in the same way that you don't you don't go to the dentist, do you, and sort of say, can I see what work you've done before on other people? You trust that they can do it. Lots of different analogies we could use there. But also, really, there should be an element that if you're not happy with it, they should be prepared to not leave you with something that you're really not happy with. There's obviously things around you changing the brief, changing the scope that they have to take into account reasonably. But there should be a reasonable partnership there where you're working together and you're producing something that, yes, you will like.
Yeah, I like that. This is a good plan. I think the key thing for me is, because obviously we've worked together for a few years, Dave, and there's always something that you ask me that I probably haven't quite thought of. Whenever I'm doing something, it'll be, you said something there about if you're issuing a leaflet, what are people's objections going to be to making that purchase or whatever it is, and you kind of think these are the meaty questions that I think very good designers would ask you, whereas perhaps entry-level designers are a little more focused on visual.
Sometimes there is just a case of going, I've been asked to design a leaflet, so I will design a leaflet. Bang, there it's gone. But it's what happens afterwards, and what you don't want to cram that sort of thing with too much information. You want to give relevant information to the reader at that point. So you need to understand what is relevant to them. Put yourself in the shoes. Put yourself in the shoes, not as a designer. Put yourself in the shoes not of your client, but of their client. Often, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a right good question in my head, Dave, and I think it's just I wonder what it was going to be. Oh, it's going to be dead good. Where did it go? Oh, that was such a good question, and it's totally and utterly vanished. Did we talk about howlers? Big branding howlers.
I think we sort of skirted around a bit.
I think we started on that path, and then we
said, the gap thing we sort of said about and things. You do get somewhere. It's certainly with a visual, it's easy to produce some kind of, you're producing a shape or something like that in it that actually is a bit like the ink blot tests, where you get them seen, they can appear differently to different people. There was one I remember a few years back where I kind of was designing. It was for a logo, trying to sort of look at the shapes, how that might work for something. And then I kind of looked back and realised I'd just designed a swastika, which probably wasn't the right route they wanted to go.
No,
So yeah, I quickly moved on to different ideas on that one. But, yeah.
I've remembered my brilliant question. So you have, I think, relatively unusually, a degree in typography. So could you give us some little kind of insights into typography snippets? So I know one of the things that you often talk about is white space, whether that's on a website, a business card, or anything like that, because I think what you just touched on there is that there is very often this desire to tell everybody everything about everything you can do. And, you know, you see these banners that have got a million words on them and websites that are just sort of chucked in your face. So what does typography teach us about getting a message across in a way that's really readable?
Yeah, kind of tricky to do this verbally. It's much easier to do if you can show examples of it. But one thing really first to say about typography is often people confuse it with designing fonts, and it isn't. It's the treatment of text on the page, treatment of it. Really, it's general graphic design, really, but just focusing on the bit where there's text
layout.
in there.
You described it as layout. Is that the
more on those lines, I suppose? Yeah, more on those lines. So it's the choice of the fonts that you use. So that's one thing that can come into it. Most of it is about making sure that it is easily readable for people. If you make it easy for people to read the information, there's more chance they'll read it. And you want them to read your information, so that all makes sense. Yeah. There are times, though, that you will, so you will use serif and sans serif fonts on different things, or script fonts. So serif are the ones where they have the little feet and the flourishes sort of on the ends of the letters. The one at the bottom of this screen, the Q&A and title for it is sans serif, because there aren't any of those little feet on the letters. So a lot of the time, something like Arial Helvetica or sans serif ones, Times New Roman is probably the best known of the serif ones, really, where those little things are. So you choose those according to. Sorry, go on.
Everybody tries to pull me towards the very sort of feminine looking handwriting scripts, because that's what seemed to be quite typical for coaches. And I always think, for one, I don't particularly like them. Oh my God, where's my screen just gone off? That's weird. Right. I think I had a little power cut or something. I don't particularly like them. I don't think they're very readable. I also think I look the same as absolutely everybody else then. So I am very much of that opinion that says, just give me a really simple font that makes my life easier. Make it a simple customer experience, client journey kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously your logo has more of a script one, but that's fine because it's one word to read. If you're reading a short sentence as a quote, maybe it's quite often to use a script font or something, because it immediately suggests that it's coming from someone, that it's either they've written it or spoken it, really. It tends to imply that a bit more. But for lengthy bits of text, you don't want that, because it becomes really hard to read and it's to do so.
I think, if I remember rightly, you have tweaked my logo because the R was a really handwriting, quite strange shape. And I said, I don't think
it was something like that. Yeah, so I think we probably did the top of the T as well. Actually, it's a good while ago, isn't it, since we did it? But so you may often on a logo, you'll adjust the actual font and redraw some aspect of it because it doesn't quite make a nice shape or whatever. But with the typography stuff, it is making things easy to read. So it's the width of the column of text can affect that. If it's too long, it becomes quite hard to read. If it's too narrow, it often just becomes a bit fussy with line breaks. The space between paragraphs, things like that, the way that that's treated, the space between lines, the leading of it, and things like that you adjust. But also, as you said, the white space. So white space is areas of a design that don't really have anything going on in it. Not necessarily white, just to be confusing. It could be any colour, but it is bits where you've not got too much going on it, and that allows sort of. It's all about designing it so that your eye is drawn through the page to the bits that you want them to see in the order that you want them to look at them, really. And things.
Perfect. We have a comment on LinkedIn actually from I'm never sure whether it's Raymond Jones or Ray Jones. photographer, and he says branding, I feel, can sometimes get in the way of a business, especially a small business. I often see logos as profile pictures, which I feel is a barrier to the business because I want to see a person. And I completely agree with that. I think, you know, you can be talking to somebody, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, as we're all on now. But if it's just a logo, I feel you can't connect with them. I don't feel I have a human connection with that person. It's like you're talking to a bot almost, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's often right. The thing is, personal branding and sort of company branding have pretty much overlapped for when it's just a one-man band or a very, very small company or something like that. They overlap so much anyway. There are times to steer to the logo, there are times to steer to a photo, but certainly, usually, you're wanting to know the person behind that company. Certainly, service businesses, things like that, you're wanting to know the person behind it. And
that's who we want to
seeing
buy
their
from.
face
The
is
small
much
business,
more powerful.
that's who we want to buy from. So we have to build that personal connection, don't we? So
yeah, because often that is the differentiator between that and the next business as well. You know, we talk about USPs and everything. An awful lot of the time, at this level, businesses aren't completely genuinely unique. The main unique thing is the way that that person interacts with their clients and treats them, things like that, isn't it?
Yes.
So a lot of it is about their personality and rapport that they can build. So yeah, the photo is a part of building that then.
Yes. Brilliant. Well, Dave, we're out of flipping time already. We're on 31.5 minutes of our 30 minutes. So thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, Richard and Raymond, for chipping in with their comments and questions. That's great. We really appreciate that. For anybody else who is watching, if you've got more questions, please feel free to keep adding those in, or just general feedback. Dave will keep an eye on the comments and answer any questions if you add any in later on. Dave, if anybody has watched us and kind of thinks I could really do with a review of my branding or a bit of an evolution of it, and they're interested in getting in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, more than happy to have a chat with anyone over that, just as an initial chat, and whether that goes anywhere from there, then we'll see. But that can find me on LinkedIn. There's Dave Bradburn usually on there. I think it's as simple as that. Facebook page is Opus Creative Design. And then I think on Instagram and Threads, I'm Opus Creative DB. Twitter, you won't find. Well, the only thing on Twitter you'll find me is looking at football transfer gossip and whinging about question time. So that's probably not much use.
I think Twitter, for me, Twitter's not for business anymore, is it? It's for ranting or some other things. Brilliant. Thank you so much for being on with me today, Dave. I'm rambling.
Thank you very much.
LinkedIn does this weird thing where it chops us off about 30 seconds later than everything else. So I usually just talk utter rubbish for the last kind of 30 seconds.
Drop in a few dad jokes at this point or something.
Just some point there. But yeah, thanks everybody for chipping in. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks. I don't actually think I've got my next guest booked in. So if there's anything in particular you would like to hear a chinwag about, or if you would like to be my chinwag guest, then I'm more than open to a good old chinwag with anybody about business. So thanks for watching. Thank you for being my guest, Dave. Have a great Friday, everybody, and we'll see you all very soon. Goodbye.